when I began to prepare to share with you this evening, I asked, Father, give me a nugget of gold. I would like to have something that is meaningful to the people at Gulf Lakes. I would like to have a nugget of gold that I can share. And of course, the very first thing Scripture always does is take you right back to those chapters in John where Jesus is meeting with his disciples for the closing evening of his ministry. Because the core, the meat, the most important elements that he shared in all the 3 years that he was with us was boiled down, condensed, and solidified in those few hours they spent together in that upper room for the Last Supper, and the washing of the saints' feet, and the teaching that he did. And what popped out of what I was studying was, I want to give you my peace. I want to give you my peace. Not like the world gives you, but it's a peace that comes from a far different place. I want to give you a peace that just is saturated full of joy, that my joy may be complete, and that you can have my joy. And if you read those chapters, you'll find those themes weaving back and forth through his discussion with them. So how do we get that peace? I was talking with a pastor friend of mine last night. We were having one of those family-type dinner-type places where we have spaghetti and conversation. And he was talking about this attack that they had. See how I snored into it? Yeah, that's what I do. We were talking about that attack that they had in Paris. And he reared back and he said, oh my goodness, the world is going... I don't know, he used some very heavy theological terms and something about a handbasket. And I said, well, I just don't see it that way. I hate it. I hate it. But there has always been meanness in the world. There has always been hatefulness in the world. There's always been anger in the world. There's always been murder in the world. And even when there was just a handful of people, Cain picked up a rock or whatever else mass destruction weapon he had and knocked out his brother. Always been that way. So where do you find peace? Where do you find joy? We sort of live in a stirred up world. And sometimes when, I'm sorry, I have an annual physical coming up, when it gets closer to the doctor's appointment, my world kind of gets stirred up. I don't like him to, poke and prod around on me and then tell me if there's something wrong. Just as soon not hear it. But here we are. So I went back in my life and I said, how can I lead the folks at Gulf Lakes toward a life of peace and a life of joy? And I went back to the book of Philippians. Philippians is one of those books that Paul wrote at the very end of his life. He's back basically summing up his own ministry, and he has so many nuggets of gold in there that he shares with the church at Philippi. It's a great book. I go to it frequently. But I was led to that by sort of a long path. When I went into ministry, I started back in seminary in 1975. That's a long ways back there. And they just threw me right in the middle of things. Before I'd been through one semester, I just finished one semester. I was assigned to a little church out in the country, and I was going to be preaching out there every Sunday for the next 2.5 years. And at the same time, I'd only finished one semester, and they put me at the Parkview Hospital in Fort Wayne, Indiana, under the chaplaincy program. That went against every rule that school had ever made about clinical pastoral education. You don't take a kid, a younger man who's just beginning his education, and throw him into a chaplain program. It's too much. He's not ready for that. You don't necessarily assign him to a church either and say, here, a group of very hurting people, take care of them. We'll just have to put up with it, I guess. I can move it down. I do snort into the microphone. That's what we've been talking about. So the rumble is not thunder out there. It's just me. Well, Jerry Mahan was the professor, the chaplain at Parkview, that was going to teach me how to be a chaplain. And Jerry Mahan had a very interesting way of just throwing you right in the deep end of the pool. We took the 4 of us that were in that class, and he brought us together into a room downstairs in the bottom part of the hospital. And he says, boys, just line up here for a second. I want you to talk to somebody. And he brought in a beautiful young lady, 26 years old, had a little girl about 3 or 4, I think. And he said, you have volunteered to help our chaplains. Tell them your story. And so she told us the story of how she had come down with Hodgkin's lymphoma or something. It's a blood cancer of some sort. And I never did get the medical terms right. I just took care of the people, not the medical conditions. And she told about how they just had a foot race between the doctors who were trying to kill her with the chemo and the disease who was trying to kill her from the inside out. And they just basically almost had a tie game getting her killed, trying to get her cured. And oh, what an ordeal she went through. And she said, then I got better. They had won the battle, and I had this beautiful little girl, and all the family, and now the Hodgkin's has come back, and it's worse than it was before. And they're going to try that foot race again. And she was in there for probably 45 minutes or so, telling us her story. And then, after she had completed it, and we had a chance to ask some questions and things, Jerry dismissed her, and it was just a group of the chaplains. And he said, okay, fellas, what do you think? You got any questions? I said, well, I don't really have a question, but I got this problem. You see, in listening to her talk, I have clenched my fists so tightly I can't get them open again. And the fingernails on my fingers are digging blood out of the palm of my hand. And I can't stop it. And he said to me, Bob, you might need to think about some unfinished business you haven't taken care of yet. Unfinished business? What does that mean? Well, you're a young father and you have 2 little babies at home, and you've got your career, you're getting your education. You might identify pretty closely with this young lady. Living in fear that something like that might happen to me too, or someone that I love. I started to think about that and pray about that. That was sort of a life-changing event. It helped me to open up that it was very important for me to think about my own spiritual, emotional health. Because if I'm going to help somebody, I have to not be the patient first, I have to be the helper first. And so I started the path. And the path has continued to this very evening. I mean, the week of preparation for this has been just as much a part of the path as it was back in 1975. But I started. And then it wasn't too many years after that that I actually had been studying Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work. And I got a chance to have an evening with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Now, you may not understand who that is, but she was a trailblazing teacher on how to take care of people who were very, very terribly sick. And she overcame amazing obstacles. By the way, that evening that we spent, she's a very small lady, or she was, very, very small. Did you know that she was one of 3 identical triplet girls? Very interesting, born in Switzerland. And she said, my earliest recollection was that my other 2 sisters were always sitting in my parents' lap. We were all identical. They couldn't tell us apart. They didn't know I was the one who was always sitting on the floor. But my sisters were always the ones that got the attention. I don't know, maybe because they were crying or something, I don't know. But she said that was just sort of my first recollection, is I wasn't the one who was going to get pampered. And as a teenage girl, she took care of, in the best way you can, the inmates at one of the death camps during World War II. That was a life-changing event for her. And she would push food and medical supplies, personal supplies, through the fence to the prisoners in the compound as just a teenage girl to try and help ease some of their suffering. So we spent 3 hours that evening, and she spoke and she talked about how to take care of those who were very, very seriously ill. And then she took a break. The only thing on the platform was a table, one of these, like the white ones that we have here. And she climbed up on that. She said, okay, now I'll take some questions. It's a very tiny lady to be on a great big platform. There must have been 5,000 of us in that hall. All healthcare givers, all caregivers. And one young man, way down on the floor, maybe 30 rows back or so, stood up and he says, Madam, I have a question. What can you tell us that will help us be ready to help those who are so terribly ill? You should have seen the look on her face. Even in the third balcony. I didn't get the good seats, did I? From the third balcony, I could still see she kind of went, oh man, all those books, all those lectures, all that stuff, and 3 hours now we've already been here. Didn't you get it? Didn't you get it? Finally, she said, look, you have to live your life, every moment of your life, as free of fear and as free of guilt as you can possibly do. Fear and guilt destroy your ability to take care of other people. Absolutely blind you. I was in a nursing home room the other day, and I was taking care of the man who was well on his way toward his grand exit from this world and entrance into the next. He's already prayed the prayer of salvation with me, and he is completely at peace. And his daughter is saying, we're going to get him better, we're going to get him better, we'll get the medication, all these breathing treatments are exactly what he needs, and we're going to get him back, and we're going to get him home, right back the way he was before. And I kind of said, well, okay, all right. But we know what her agenda is. She's not going to help her dad. He can't depend on her for what he needs. He needs somebody who can talk to him in his language, and if you're scared to death, or you're feeling guilty about unfinished business, then hey, we all have things that we'd like to have done differently, done better, done right. But it will destroy us. You can't have the peace that Jesus Christ promised us. You can't have the joy. You can't have the life abundant if you're all bound up with fear and guilt And Jesus gave us a chance to live above those things, free of those bondages. And so I listened to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and I thought, it's Philippians. It's Philippians, forward and backward. She's been reading my book. Well, not the one that I wrote, but the book that I studied. If you read in Philippians, first chapter, 12th verse, now I tell you, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. And as a result, it's become clear throughout the entire palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. Because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now as always Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I go on living in the body, it will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it's more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know I will remain and will continue with you for your progress and your joy in the faith. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whenever I come to see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This will be a sign to them that they're being destroyed. I want you to understand, Philippians is bumper to bumper, one encouragement right after another to live above fear and guilt. Fear and guilt. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? It doesn't take too long to say, I don't want to be sick. I don't want to be poor. I don't want to be incarcerated. I don't want to be persecuted. I don't want to be laughed at. I don't want to be a miserable failure. What are you guilty about? I could have done so much better. I could have performed so much more efficiently. I've let down some of the people that I've loved. I quit too soon. Whatever it might be. But if we do not see, if we cannot come to the point where we can feel the love, forgiveness, and grace of Jesus Christ, we are stuck in our fear and guilt. You see, Jesus Christ did not fear death. The Garden of Gethsemane was not a fear of death. He knew he was going to be with his Father. It was that terrible pain of suffering, of separation. When he took upon our sins, God, his only Father in heaven, his eternal partner, had to turn his face and look away from the sinfulness of his own Son who had never sinned. When he said, take this cup away from me, and he said it 3 times, it wasn't death. Well, for us, we just don't. My father passed away August 4th. He was 93. And he had helped so many people, 70 years of being a pastor. It was quite a record. The last several days, he was struggling. His heart was failing. And he would turn to me and he says, I'm just all messed up, Bobby. I'm all messed up. I'm all messed up. I said, what does that mean? He said, for 70 years, I've been the one who had to find the solution to help people, to help them, to lift them up, to find a way of forgiving or encouraging or blessing them in some way. And he says, I'm in a spot right now, I just don't know what to do. I'm messed up. I can't find the solution. See, even after all those years, he's still finding the solution. I said, Dad, give it a little bit. I think you'll find the solution. And as he died in my arms, I was telling him how much I loved him. How proud we were of him. See, we don't have to fear that. Jesus, I guess I should ask you to do an assignment. You want a homework assignment?
Yes.
Oh, great. Tim's going to do that. Expect this next week to be fulfilled now. Just count the number of times that Jesus told his disciples, don't be afraid. Fear not. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. What are you afraid of? Well, they must have got the lesson. Because after Pentecost, they're in the temple teaching about Jesus coming back from the dead, and the chief priest and all the people who are in authorities are arresting them and saying, don't you ever use that name again. It's just almost like they didn't have a fear in their entire being. They must have gotten the lesson. Somewhere, there's a place that God brings us to the point where we can be free of fear. No matter how big the thing is we're afraid of. I know of people who have worried every single day for decades they wouldn't have enough money to live on and retire, finish their lives. It's a terrible thing to be poor. I know, I've been there. But you know what? Decades of worry didn't put a single shining nickel back in the bank for them. Not a single nickel. But they lived in fear. And not in joy. And not in peace. Well, what are you guilty about? What are you guilty about? If anybody had something to be guilty about, it'd be Peter after the denial. When he denied he even knew who Jesus was, 3 times over. What are you guilty about? You done anything that bad? Some of us have come close. No, we do things. The spur of the moment, the temptation, the weakness, and suddenly there we are. You know. Peter found himself in the courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas, in the middle of the trial of Jesus. What would you have done when somebody came to you as a stranger, surrounded by the enemy, and asked if you knew him? I'll tell you what, I got some sympathy for Peter. I got some sympathy. But Jesus didn't just leave it as sympathy. He takes Peter, and he says, Peter, do you love me? Well, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Okay, that's one. If you love me, feed my sheep. I got a job for you to do. Okay, Peter, yeah? Do you love me? I thought we just settled this. I said yes. Okay, yes, I do love you. Okay, that's twice. If you love me, feed my lambs. Take care of the little ones that are totally without being able to help themselves. Totally helpless. Sure glad that's over. Peter, do you really love me? Cock's going to crow here in a minute. Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Then feed my sheep. Restore the servant. in the same way he was guilty of letting Jesus down. My friends, I'll close with one more quick story, and then I'm going to tell you how the story ends, all right? 1988, I was going to a pastor's conference, and I was hit by drunk drivers, broadside. I was in a VW Rabbit, and they were in a Buick, or some car, I guess, doing about 80 miles an hour, and they hit me sideways. I woke up in the hospital and told Judy what I had seen and heard, but not what I saw laying on the pavement. Laying on the pavement, looking straight up into the face of those who were trying to help me. I watched from behind the car about 3 steps, from behind the people who were leaned over me, as I lay in front of them. My body was on the ground, but I was standing behind the car. When you say, Lord, I want to know your peace. I want to know your joy. I want to know the depth of what you have given us. You might be just a little bit careful how you phrase that. Because as I stood there and I watched them cut my body out of the straps and things that were strangling me, I was not breathing, I felt a peace like I cannot define for you in words. I had 3 kids at home. The oldest one was just ready to start driving. A wife, family, a pastorate in Fort Wayne. There were a lot of things I shouldn't have felt good about. You know? Oops. No. I know the peace that Jesus Christ was talking about. I know the joy that comes from knowing that everything was securely held in my Father's hand. Did I have to worry about those 3 kids? No. Did I have to worry about my beloved one? No. My Father in heaven was going to take care of each one of them. Now, once I woke up, they were back to being my job again. I had to take care of them again. But the peace that we had felt, the peace that was a part of that experience, changed forever what I feel and what I look forward to and what I anticipate feeling again. I want you to understand, every fear you have is an indication of your lack of complete faith. When Peter got back in the boat, the first thing he says is, "Oh, little faith, Peter. Oh, you little teeny weeny faith, Peter. Oh, you," I'll use one of my high school expressions, "Oh, you panty waist faith, Peter." Call on the Lord for faith. If you're afraid, if you're guilty, He takes the guilt away. He takes the fear away. His perfect love drives out fear. It says that. It promises that. But it comes from faith. And then it comes, the next step is acceptance of God's divine authority over every area of your life. If you think you can have joy, if you think you can have faith, and you want to hold on to the checkbook and make sure that your bank's balance is just exactly what it should be in order to be able to have enough to make it, you will not have joy. You will not have peace. You will not have faith. You have to say, and I'm sorry, you may not agree with that, I'm sorry. Have you not read the Ten Commandments? The first one is, I have to be God. Let me do it. Be my people. Let me be your God. Over everything. If you don't let him, you've already broken the number one commandment. You want peace? You got to get it right. Because you have to accept his ultimate sovereignty over everything. Right. My doctor's appointment. My appointment with my tax accountant. You know, yes, he's authority even over the IRS. Even the attacks in Paris. Everything comes under the ultimate authority of our Father in heaven. And then rejoice. And again, I say rejoice, as Paul says so often in Philippians, if you read it. Because it's already settled. Your life is secure in his hand. And then, believe it or not, you will feel the peace. But it's a process. Father in heaven, we're not there yet. I don't care how old we might be or how far we've come through so many trials and hardships and experiences of the past. We're not there yet. But because we're here tonight, we're on the right path. Because we're here tonight, your Spirit is working inside of us. And we're making progress tonight. We're making progress tonight on becoming the people of faith, of acceptance, of joy, and of peace. We ask, Lord, that you will take us as though we were vessels made of clay and pour in the faith, pour in the acceptance, pour in the joy, pour in the peace that you already have set aside for us, and let us celebrate the forgiveness, the grace, and the victory of Jesus Christ in our lives again. And then help hold that in our hearts as we move forward from here and live our lives feeding the sheep, taking care of the lambs, taking care of the work that you've laid into our hands so that we can be found faithful in serving you.